Maye, Tereo, Kulakabe, Amaya Kekwe, Salsirus, Amaya Mona, in the beach, Amaya Kekwe, Salsirus, Amaya.
Hey, beautiful family. A few months ago, I made a video about the hidden brainwave codes that are encoded and enriching our ancient texts all around the planet, from the Quran to the Bible, the Dharmas, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, and expanding on that side of things in the Vedas. It's in there. The code is present for these states of consciousness. Now, in the Middle East, in India, these codes have, certainly in the Vedas, they have their own words for states of consciousness, but back in the Western culture, we didn't have them. We don't have a language with that much depth. And so, to repeat myself briefly to set up this video, and if you want to know more details about this, go and watch that video, is what I would suggest you do. We, in modern science, understand brainwave frequencies. We have beta, alpha, theta, delta, gamma. We know this. And we know it through scientific instrumentation that measures those frequencies, and we have labeled them with those names. The ancient Christians didn't have that equipment, nor did they have beta, alpha, theta, delta to assign to those frequencies from the brain. So they created a code, and that code is earth, water, air, fire, beta, alpha, theta, delta. And so you can decode the journey of the human vehicle inside stories, inside the Bible, by understanding this. You know that Moses rose up to a higher place on the mountain where he met a burning bush. He went from beta, alpha, theta. He went from earth, water, air to fire, where he was baptized with fire, where he had that higher state of consciousness, and lo and behold, when he sees a burning bush, he speaks with God. This is how the map of the human body inside these ancient texts works. But because we've forgotten them, in our modern world, we are deeply vulnerable. And if we understood them, and we taught them, and we remembered them, and we embraced them, that vulnerability would pass. It would be diminished. So, if you look at the modern world, one of the most common behaviors that we accept as a normality is screen time. And now that screen time traditionally was television. But these days it can be laptops, tablets, smartphones, and everybody, I think, begins to understand the addictive nature of the screen. But what I think we don't begin to understand is what we are actually doing to our brain, and moreover for this video, the brains of our children, when we give these behaviors to them. Now, I'm a firm believer that children don't have to think like us, act like us, behave like us. They don't have to do any of that. Children don't have to be us. Children are an original life that need to be what they need to be. This is what a child is, and we must nurture them and nourish them like you would anything, a house plant, etc., so as it blossoms and blooms in its own way. Now, naturally on that journey, we influence our children. Our behaviors influence our little ones. So when we don't acknowledge the danger of our own addictions and our own vulnerabilities to certain technologies in our home, then our children are totally comfortable and blindly comfortable with those technologies whilst growing up. I, and most of you, grew up with some level of perhaps computer, but definitely television. And people don't realize what this does to the very core depths of your subconscious. From being a child, I am comfortable with the idea that I sit and I look at a screen which takes over my body using sound and light and stimulates my emotions and my brainwaves And I receive in this daydreaming state, because television forces the mind into the alpha brainwave frequency, I receive this information going into me, and I am totally comfortable with that setting. Now, many people woke up and said the media is a lie, especially after certain world events like 9/11. Everybody was dubious about what the television was showing us. We had reports on that day, for example, that World Trade Center 7 had collapsed and the building was still standing. And this was the first time that a building had collapsed from office fires at free fall speed in human history. And yet they reported on it early. So you have these things where people asked questions and said, this doesn't suit my belief here. My eyes cannot determine that what I am witnessing is honest and true. And so persons started to turn away from the television. But what happened was we were comfortable without the TV sitting with a screen feeding us information. So many of us switched to free media. And actually that free media got worse, because now instead of a pre-programmed list coming to you, you now have very clever computer algorithms that want to hold your attention onto the next topic. So rather than watching the mainstream media, which has a set broadcast schedule, now you have a tailored, addictive broadcast schedule using these algorithms. And we are comfortable from childhood to sit there and let this happen. Now, aside from the fact that what's happening there is you are creating a dependence in your body on an external light source and sound source to entertain you and make you feel peaceful. You are doing that. Instead of having the emotional stability that is brought about by resting yourself in the present, in the real light of the world, not the fake light of the screen. Instead of the persons playing God with the screen, you get to sit in the real light and absorb that stability. Now, it's an actual scientific fact that children are less emotionally stable who watch television. This is a proven, studied fact. And why is that? And it's not just television, it's screen time as well. There are multiple factors, but let me point something out. The ancient Christians have this code: beta, alpha, theta, delta, earth, water, air, fire. Jesus Christ said, unless you become as children, you may not enter the kingdom. Now, children up until the age of 8, their brains operate in delta and theta, air and fire. That's where they vibrate. That's the resonance and frequency of their daily life. When you expose them to screens, when you expose them to television, tablets, cartoons, movies, smartphones, from the age of 0 to 8, you take away their natural gift of being rooted in that peaceful presence that we must seek with meditation. We as adults work in beta and alpha to survive. And as we grow older, we use technology to try and relive the childhood state. We as a collective species are using technology to make our life so much easier that we don't have to be constantly problem solving, and we can spend more time re-achieving and reaching the childhood brainwave states, the desirable relaxation of theta and delta. But when you put your children in front of a screen, you force them into beta and alpha. You rob them. We take from our children a God-given peace, and we replace it with an addictive dopamine stillness. We believe it to be an addictive dopamine entertainment source that we have grown to feel normality with. And it's really not okay and healthy. And this is not to judge parents out there. This is not what it's for. It's to say, let us wake up to this. We are walking around, many of us are walking around complaining about, at present, the global situation, how the pandemic has been manipulated to change the way that the human consciousness, first and foremost, operates, and the way we will be governed in the future generations to come. That is the the manipulation, that is the Trojan horse behind it. The way humans think is the most valuable resource on the planet. The way the media has steered us in unison with the politicians in their legislation has altered, it's manufactured, it's sculpted human consciousness to be in a totally different state, a totally more suggestible state, a totally more accepting state of certain behavioral changes of society than what it was 18 months ago. And that's irreversible at this point. And that was only made possible because persons had screens. Without the television, without the smartphone, without the tablet, without the laptop, the pandemic could not have happened. Persons might have got ill from whatever this illness is that makes you feel the way it makes you feel. I have recently experienced it and it did not feel like a virus. It felt like, I had this discussion in my comments section, it felt like I was purging a toxin from my body like when I do long water fasts. It did not feel like a traditional cold or flu. It felt totally different. It felt toxic. I've experienced that. Many people have experienced that. But would there have been an actual pandemic with the global changes to our rights, to our freedoms, if it were not for the screens? And the answer is no, it would have been an impossibility. There would have been newspapers, etc., so on and so forth, but we would have had to have been witnessing it ourselves. We would have had to have been seeing a relevant number of people dying around us or sick around us for it to take hold in human consciousness that there was a pandemic. And most of us, because the numbers were so small, did not experience that, and so it was only experienced through the screen. And that's why when persons who have grown up from childhood used to the mainstream media, sitting in a position with lights and sounds, entertaining, distracting them, when they see something is wrong and they go into the algorithms of the other side of it, the opposition to it, they are still buying, they are still investing their energy into this story that is happening around the planet, and they are not altering it. They are still in a passive position following the story. Whether they are following it with the opinion that they do not agree with this and something is up and something is wrong, or they are following it with the opinion that they believe in this and they know that this is something that's happening in their world and they believe that this is the true narrative. Doesn't matter if you're sitting here and opposing the narrative or you're sitting here and believing the narrative, you are still sitting still in the same position, disabled by the lights and the sounds and the algorithms, and some persons on this side the fear, persons on this side the anxieties of what is going on. And so all of that was only possible because of screens. And yet we don't work on this. We don't work on our relationship to the screen and the deep vulnerability within there. Screens take your mind from beta to alpha as an adult and leave you in a daydreaming state. In that state, you are passive. In that state, you do not take action. And one of the problems on the planet is many persons who are opposed to this loveless system, this antichrist system that has money to bomb, it has money to create wars, it has money to try and do ridiculous things that we don't need as a species, but doesn't have money to deal with children who are starving and suffering and sick and without education. Then many of us wake up and say, the dominant conscious force behind our system is wrong. It is not just, it is not fair. But we wake up to it and we still stay with the lights and the sounds taking over our very being. And because of that, we don't take action to manifest in opposition to it. And the opposition manifestation is what is needed. Because right now, millions and millions of people, perhaps billions, are there looking at their screen and they feel something is wrong with the system. They feel we are being misled. They feel that certain world powers are taking advantage of the current situation that humanity is in to manipulate and mold their consciousness. But they are still staying plugged into the story instead of stepping out, getting rooted and centered away from the dependence on those lights and those sounds to make them feel comfortable, and rooted and dependent on the much more slower nature of the lights and the sounds of the natural world. And when you don't come to that natural world, original thought and creation and manifestation cannot happen. I, once over after 9/11, became deeply hooked on conspiracies and understanding the world banks and the leaders. And the more I progressed on that journey, I believed so much that this whole system was created just purely to imprison mankind. That's how it felt. As I grew more wise in my years, I understood that these persons were expressing elements of my shadow. And so they were expressing elements of my shadow because it's within human nature. And those of us who believe it's not in human nature haven't seen that part of our shadow yet. We create different facets and stories to explain away the human shadow being expressed in persons we can't understand. But the reality of the matter becomes that what is happening with the collective is that we have persons who are expressing parts of our own shadow in the world. We look at these world leaders and we can't believe what is happening. We look at things in the mainstream and we can't believe that they are doing this, and so we must believe that there is something more to it, more nefarious than merely the fact that the potential for that evil is in the mirror on a morning when I look at myself. And this is what Jung showed us about integrating that shadow. We must look to ourselves to change it. When I was in that state, wanted revolution. And then I acknowledged that the behaviors inside those persons were behaviors laying dormant inside as a potentiality, my shadow. And this happened due to life events. I'll tell you quickly. I met a child who had been raping people in Africa. I sat with him and he had no moral compass that what he'd done is wrong. And it opened up the veil of part of my shadow and showed me this is a child doing evil and he doesn't even know it was wrong. It's a manifestation of darkness from human behavior, but he didn't know. And so that could have been me had I not been raised with a family, had I been raised in his position. And this opened the veil for my shadow. And so part of my shadow. And so when I started looking at how I want to change the system, how I want to change the planetary system around me, I realized that what I wanted to do was be an antidote to this darkness. And that is to, those persons may have a shadow of their own of the loving behaviors that many of us want to express. And so that's what I decided to bring in. And I decided to use social media to bring that light into the world and to say, look, we can do good with this technology as well as doing bad. We can write our own stories. And this system, which is dominated by an antichrist consciousness, which has forgotten millions and billions of children. In the country that I am in, there are 500,000 street children, forgotten by the push for development, the push for capitalist ways. And yet, whilst we are pushing for that and we are in exuberant luxury in the West often, these children are totally forgotten by the system. So I said, let me find a way to share love and build that system. And to do that, you have to root yourself in a space of original creation. And the screen won't let you do it. The screen will not let you draw in original manifestation, because it's only in the depths of yourself that you can pull out that which is original, your story. And this is pulling back to something that I said at the beginning of the video. Children are not supposed to be like us. My sons are not meant to speak like me, act like me, be like me. They are supposed to be their own original life that needs to do what it needs to do. And we have to learn to navigate our influence upon that, because many of us have become a copy in elements of our parents and their behaviors and habits. And so many of us are not able to find that original blossoming from within. And often, the biggest killer of not finding the original blossoming is the refusal to bring light out, because we exchange it for light coming in with sounds and stimulating and disabling this human vehicle in front of a screen. And so, what we must do is find our relationship with screens to become tools. Screens must never be our master. We must be the master of every screen in our life. And when you have children, if you want them to have a head start on this, so they don't have to go through the painstaking work of sitting still and having their anatomy call on them, go to the screen. Go there now, it's easier. It's easier than sitting here with these impulses and my thoughts and my desires and my shadow. It's easier to go to the screen and not listen to this. Instead of them going through that, you can give them a head start. And from the age of 1 to 8 to 10, hopefully even a little bit older, don't let them use the screen. Because in that space they are in beta, they are in theta and delta. They are in air and fire. Earth, water, air, fire, gamma, new mind. Beta, alpha, theta, delta. They are there. They are naturally there, where Buddhist monks spend hours trying to achieve a conscious state of theta, where you only achieve it most of the time when you're just about to fall asleep or in your sleep state. Your children are there. And when you put the screen in front of them, you take it off them and you force them into beta and alpha. And you force them away from a gift. And not only that, because they have not had that stability inside their brainwaves as a child, you create a lifelong dependence on the brainwave activity induced in them by the screen. And escaping that addiction takes effort and time. And even those who begin to wake up to the content being broadcast to them often don't break the addiction. The addiction of sitting with the light and the sound coming in is still there. And so they move from one broadcaster to another broadcaster, trying to find somewhere where they don't get polluted. When the only way to do it is to be the master of that screen, and not move from entertainment source unconsciously to entertainment source, which is what is happening from mainstream media, from CNN to YouTube. This is not taking control of it. This is plugging in, trying to find a safe place to be dominated and used by the screen. And in this modern day, the screen wants your attention more than anything. Those simple computer programs do it for profit, but I dare say they do it for other reasons too. Because as I say, the most valuable asset and resource in this modern world is the way you and I behave, believe, and think about the world. And that is what is so alarming about this pandemic, that over the last 18 months, our behaviors as a collective have been altered and changed irreversibly, and many have not acknowledged it. And that only could occur because of televisions, screens, and laptops. So take control is my advice of screens, laptops, and make them a tool at your disposal. And don't subject your children to that damage that comes from forcing them into the beta and alpha state and creates a lifelong dependency if they don't find a way to break it. And that lifelong dependency means that whoever controls the broadcast, whoever controls the algorithm, controls the majority of your child's life. And the way their consciousness will grow, expand, and mold and interact with this beautiful world. That was all. God bless, guys. Bye. TV. It's a curse and a blessing. You can use fire to cook your dinner, or you can use it to burn something or someone. I can use social media to help the most forgotten, ostracized, vulnerable children inside our human family. Or you can use it to start wars. It all boils down to the governance of the self. In which direction will you go? You know, the meek shall inherit the earth is a quote from Jesus Christ. But the interpretation of the word meek, in one sense, can mean those who have a weapon but choose to keep it sheathed. Those are the persons who have seen their shadow. Those are the persons who have the ability and the potential to create great chaos inside the world if they so wish. But they take the moral high ground and they choose to walk in the moral higher light. Those are the meek. But most of us don't know that we have something sheathed, because most of us have not seen our shadow, because we spend too many hours outside of ourselves because of the screen and not inside, understanding our nature.